For 900 solar standard cycles, the Pax Australis had maintained an uneasy equilibrium across the Orion-Perseus corridor. It was an era carved not out of genuine fraternity, but out of calculated exhaustion. The ancient galactic powers had long settled into their bureaucratic decadence, comfortable in the assumption that every star-faring species was governed by the same predictable mathematics of self-preservation. Humanity, having arrived late to the cosmic table, had willingly signed the accord. To the high chambers of the Vaelen Ascendancy and their client species, the Sol Concordat appeared remarkably passive. Where the reptilian warlords of Thrax boasted of their conquest fleets and the avian diplomats of the Cathani flaunted bioengineered dreadnoughts, humanity brought cargo ships, agricultural terraformers, and patient diplomats. They swallowed border skirmishes with measured protests. They tolerated crippling trade tariffs with bureaucratic counteroffers. The Ascendancy mistook human restraint for biological subservience. Commander Elena Vance walked down the grand colonnade of Apex Citadel, the colossal neutral station orbiting the binary suns of the Ethelgard Reach. She wore the charcoal-gray dress uniform of the Sol Concordat Naval Diplomatic Corps, unadorned save for the silver service stripes running along her collar. Her posture was straight, her jaw set with the rigid discipline born of 3 decades in the void. At her side walked Sub-Officer Marcus Reyes, whose nervous gaze darted repeatedly toward the towering Imperial Praetorians lining the archways. "They've increased the guard density threefold since yesterday, Commander," Marcus whispered under the station's ambient hum. "Our comms suite was jammed the second our shuttle cleared their docking ring. This isn't a treaty review. It's an ambush in court dress." Elena did not break her stride. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the golden double doors leading into the Grand Conclave. "The Ascendancy wants a show of force, Marcus," Elena replied, her voice level, carrying the calm authority of an officer who had stared into the heart of dying supernovas. "High Archon Vaelen thinks that if he intimidates Earth's delegation today, the Concordat will surrender the mining rights to the Outer Veil. He believes peace is an admission of fear. And if he pushes beyond trade demands?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena paused for half a second before reaching the threshold. She adjusted the lapel of her coat, where a small, encrypted quantum data core rested securely against her chest. "Then he will discover why our ancestors built walls before they built palaces," she murmured. "Hold your head high, Lieutenant. You represent the billions who chose not to pick up the sword. Make sure he knows we chose it freely." The Grand Conclave Chamber was an amphitheater of crystalline obsidian, designed specifically to dwarf foreign dignitaries beneath the towering dais of the High Archon. High Archon Vaelen of the Vaelen Ascendancy sat perched upon a throne of polished meteoric iron, flanked by 4-meter-tall honor guards clad in iridescent carapace armor. His scaled, reptilian features twisted into an expression of theatrical contempt as the two humans stepped onto the polished center floor. "Representative Vance," Valen's voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by acoustic sub-emitters that vibrated the very decking beneath their feet. "You stand before the sovereign authority of the Ascendancy. For 9 centuries, your fragile kindred have grazed upon the margins of our empire under the charity of our ancestors. Today, that charity expires." Elena Vance stood in the focal circle, her gaze unwavering, meeting the Archon's luminous yellow pupils without flinching. "High Archon," Elena began, her voice crisp and broadcast clearly through the chamber's translators. "The Sol Concordat has honored every clause of the Pax Australis. We have supplied grain to your famine worlds, provided medical logistics during the Corvus Plague, and maintained strict demilitarization along the treaty lanes. If the Ascendancy seeks to renegotiate boundary jurisdictions, we have brought our formal diplomatic draft." Vaelen let out a dry, rasping hiss that was echoed by the laughter of his subordinate lords. "A draft?" Vaelen sneered, leaning forward. A mammal clutching pieces of paper while standing in the House of Predators. "You bring words, Commander, because your species has no claws. You preach peace because the thought of true galactic war terrifies your weak, short-lived kind. Elena took half a step forward. Her voice lowered, shedding all diplomatic warmth, replaced by a cold, resonant clarity that made the closest alien scribes hesitate. "Do not mistake our patience for weakness, Archon," she said softly. "The Concordat chose peace not because we fear war, but because we know its true cost. We buried our conquerors 1,000 years ago. I strongly advise you not to dig them up." Vaelen rose from his throne in sudden, calculated fury. He drew a jewel-encrusted sidearm from his sash, pointing the glowing muzzle directly at Elena's chest. The entire room fell into a deathly stillness. "The Ascendancy does not receive warnings from vermin," Vaelen hissed. "Let this be the message Earth takes to its grave." Marcus lunged forward with a strangled cry, but was instantly pinned by 3 guard pikes. On the cold obsidian floor, Elena Vance lay motionless, a searing burn scar across her chest insignias. But her eyes remained open for one final, agonizing breath. Her hand did not reach for her wound. Instead, her fingers curled around a lapel pin, snapping the emergency quantum beacon hidden within the data core. Vaelen holstered his weapon with casual arrogance, turning his back on the fallen officer. Inform the Sol Concordat, Vaelen commanded coldly to his aides. Their 900-year peace is terminated. He did not know that 3 light-years away, a dormant sensor network had just received a single forward broadcast, Command Protocol Alpha, Omega. Inside the subterranean command fortress beneath Mount Cheyenne on Earth, Fleet Admiral Marcus Vance, Elena's older brother, stood before the holographic star map of the Orion Arm. Around him, 300 naval strategists, tactical analysts, and electronic warfare officers worked in absolute, terrifying silence. The emergency signal from Apex Citadel was hovering above the primary holotank in glowing crimson text. "Officer down. Treaty compromised. Restraint lifted." "Admiral," Voicecom's Officer Reynolds reported, her voice trembling slightly. "The Ascendancy state broadcast has just aired across the outer colonies. High Archon Vaelen claims Commander Vance committed an act of espionage and was summarily executed under Imperial law. They are demanding immediate evacuation of all human frontier stations within 48 hours. Admiral Vance did not blink. His weathered face was chiseled from granite, his hands resting lightly behind his back. "Have they dispatched their frontline battle fleets?" Vance asked, his tone devoid of rage, a flat, icy stillness that frightened the room more than any shout could have. "Yes, sir," Reynolds replied. "The 3rd and 7th Imperial fleets have moved into the border lanes. Over 800 capital ships. They are broadcasting victory chants on all open frequencies." Admiral Vance took a slow breath. He turned to the senior communications director. "Transmit Directive 0 to the Lagrange shipyards and the Kuiper Belt dry docks," Vance commanded. The entire operations deck paused. For 9 centuries, Directive 0 was a myth, a sealed file buried under 5 levels of civilian and military clearance, created on the day humanity signed the Pax Astralis. "Sir." The director hesitated. "Directive 0 will unseal the silent bastions. It will convert 90% of civilian industrial output to wartime logistics within 6 hours. The High Archon believed our peace was an apology," Vance said, turning back toward the star map. He forgot that the treaty was not signed to protect humanity from the galaxy. It was signed to protect the galaxy from what we were. Across the solar system, the illusion of human vulnerability dissolved in an instant. Around Mars, massive hollowed-out asteroids that had functioned as automated grain silos for 300 years shed their outer rock casings, revealing miles long, hyperdense tungsten railgun barrels. In the dark expanse beyond Neptune, 30 colossal Goliath-class super-dreadnoughts, ships humanity had built in secret and mothballed in the frozen void, ignited their antimatter cores for the first time in 900 years. Humanity had not spent 9 centuries forgetting how to fight. They had spent 9 centuries, inform every fleet command, Admiral Vance ordered, his eyes burning with quiet, lethal resolve. No surrender terms. No preliminary negotiations. We jumped directly to their front door. Admiral Vaelen of the Ascendancy 3rd Fleet reclined comfortably in his command couch aboard the dreadnought Vaelen's Pride. Orbiting the fortress world of Vaelen Secundus, his fleet of 400 gilded warships represented the pinnacle of imperial naval doctrine. Their hulls were coated in gleaming plasma-deflecting crystal, and their forward particle lances were capable of glassing continents. Any movement from the human border garrisons? Vaelen asked lazily, sipping nectar from a carved chalice. Nothing of significance, High Admiral, his sensory officer reported with a dismissive chuckle. A few dozen escort frigates scattered near their jump gate. They have not even deployed their defensive minefields. They are paralyzed by grief. As expected, Vaelen smirked. Set course for the Sol perimeter. We shall burn their outer moons and accept their unconditional report. Vaelen roared, spilling his chalice across the console. What was that seismic spike? Gravitational anomalies across all 12 sectors, the sensor officer screamed, his scales turning pale gray. Multiple warp signatures. No. Hundreds of warp signatures. They aren't dropping at the system rim. They are jumping inside our defensive perimeter. Through the forward observation deck of the Vaelen's Pride, space tore open like shattered glass. Out of the black emerged the vanguard of the Sol Concordat strike fleet. These were not the white-painted diplomatic shuttles the Empire had mocked. These were monstrous, slab-sided behemoths of matte black armor plating, bristling with heavy point defense turrets and spinal-mounted kinetic accelerators. Open fire with particle lances. Raise all plasma barriers. Vaelen shouted in panic. The Ascendancy fleet unleashed a blinding cascade of ruby energy beams, striking the oncoming human dreadnoughts. But the human ships did not falter. Their forward hulls, reinforced with ablative composite layers and magnetic dispersion fields, absorbed the thermal punishment without breaking formation. And then, humanity answered. The Ascendancy's energy shields, designed to deflect heat and particle beams, shattered instantly under the sheer, brutal momentum of 5-ton solid metal projectiles. The Imperial cruiser Draxus took a direct spinal hit. The kinetic slug tore through its decorative crystal prow, punched through 4 decks of crew quarters, obliterated its central reactor core, and exited the stern before the alien crew could even register the breach. The ship broke into 3 jagged burning fragments. They aren't using energy weapons, the sensor officer shrieked over the blaring red lights. They are throwing raw planetary mass at relativistic speeds. Our shields cannot withstand the kinetic transfer. Admiral Vaelen stood frozen, watching 5 Imperial battleships disintegrate in less than 40 seconds. For the first time in his life, he understood the terror of an apex predator that did not play by civilized rules. All strike groups, this is Concordat flagship dreadnought Iron Vengeance, Admiral Vance's voice cut through the operational comlinks, calm and deliberate. Maintain box formation. Suppress their secondary defense batteries. Clear the orbital lanes for the ground insertion teams. The orbital space above Vaelen Secundus had transformed into a graveyard of burning Imperial metal. The Vaelen Ascendancy's military doctrine had been built upon prestige, theatrical dominance, and ritualized warfare. For 9 centuries, they had fought skirmishes where fleets traded dignified energy barrages at extreme distances before entering lengthy diplomatic truces. Humanity fought with the clinical, merciless efficiency of a species that had survived nuclear winters and world wars. Alien attack craft swarmed toward the human battleships, attempting to exploit what they assumed were blind spots in the bulky hulls. But the human cruisers did not have blind spots. Thousands of automated kinetic interceptors filled the vacuum with a storm of superheated shrapnel, shredding the fragile Imperial strike craft like dry leaves in a hurricane. Admiral Vaelen's flagship is attempting to initiate an emergency hyperspace burn, Tactical Officer Reynolds announced from the Iron Vengeance bridge. Target their sublight drives with kinetic sabot rounds, Vance ordered calmly. Leave the bridge intact. I want their commander to watch. Across the void, 2 solid tungsten rounds struck the rear thruster cowlings of the Vaelen's Pride. The engines imploded into a shower of cobalt sparks, leaving the massive golden flagship drifting helplessly in low orbit, pinned against the burning backdrop of its own fortress world. Admiral Vance linked his command console directly to the crippled alien flagship. The visual screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Vaelen bleeding from a head wound, surrounded by smoke and ruined holographic consoles. Human. Vaelen gasped, his reptilian chest heaving with terror. This is madness. You are violating the ancient protocols of war. We are an imperial aristocracy. You cannot treat us like common barbarians. Admiral Vance leaned over his console. His gaze was colder than the vacuum outside. 900 years ago, Vance spoke, each word measured and heavy as iron, our ancestors begged the galaxy for peace. You thought our treaties were chains we wore out of fear. But those chains were the only thing holding us back. Tell your High Archon that Earth is coming for his crown. The imperial throne world of Vael Prime had never heard the sound of orbital sirens. In 12 millennia. Its skies were filled with towering spires of spun glass and platinum, built upon the tribute of hundreds of subjugated species. But today, the sky was bleeding fire. High Archon Vaelen stood upon his high balcony, his claws digging into the marble railing as he watched emergency evacuation shuttles scatter like frightened insects. The reports reaching his personal terminal were impossible, terrifying, and relentless. The 3rd Fleet at Vorik Secundus, annihilated. The 7th Fleet at the Perseus Gate, shattered in 4 hours. The Imperial defense grid, knocked offline by localized orbital kinetic strikes. Where are our reinforcements from the outer prefectures? Vaelen screamed at his shivering ministers. Where are the vassal armies? They refuse to deploy, High Archon. Grand Vizier Zalcor stammered, dropping a data slate to the floor. The Human Concordat has declared neutrality. The Thraxian warlords have closed their borders. When the galaxy saw the sensor recordings of what humanity did to our dreadnoughts, no one would stand in their way. Vaelen stumbled back as the clouds above Vael Prime parted. Dozens of human atmospheric dropships descended through the burning sky, surrounded by gunships trailing heavy twin autocannons. Behind them, hanging like an eclipse over the sun, loomed the 3-kilometer silhouette of the Iron Vengeance. Out of the pods stepped the orbital shock troopers of the Sol Concordat. Clad in matte black-powered exosuits, holding heavy kinetic assault rifles, they advanced with terrifying synchronization. The Imperial Palace Royal Guard, adorned in ceremonial gold plate and wielding plasma lances, attempted a frantic defensive charge. In less than 90 seconds, the entire royal defense line collapsed. Not a single human soldier broke stride. Vaelen backed away from the balcony doors toward his throne, his breathing ragged, his hand trembling as he reached once more for his jeweled sidearm. But before his fingers could touch the holster, the grand throne room doors were blown inward by a focused-shaped charge. Through the smoke of the ruined throne room walked Fleet Admiral Marcus Vance, accompanied by 6 towering shock troopers whose weapon barrels remained raised and smoking. Admiral Vance carried no sidearm in his hand. He wore his formal dress uniform, crisp and clean beneath the layer of settling dust, with a single silver service medal pinned over his chest. The exact duplicate of the medal worn by Elena Vance on Apex Citadel. High Archon Vaelen pressed his back against the base of his throne, the gold fabric of his ceremonial robe torn and dusted in gray ash. He raised his trembling plasma pistol with both hands, aiming it at Vance's forehead. "Stay back, mammal!" Vaelen shrieked, his voice cracking with unmasked terror. "I am the sovereign of the Vaelen Ascendancy. You are an inferior species. You have no right to enter this sacred hall." Admiral Vance did not stop. He continued walking until the glowing muzzle of Valen's pistol was less than 3 inches from his chest. "Shoot," Vance said quietly. Valen's claw shook violently on the trigger mechanism. But as he looked into Vance's eyes, he saw no fear, no hesitation, and no anger. He saw only a vast, cold abyss, the terrifying realization that humanity had conquered its own savagery eons ago, and that by killing their diplomat, he had stripped them of their only self-imposed limit. With a pathetic whimper, Valakar's hand gave out. The jeweled weapon slipped from his claws and clattered uselessly onto the marble floor. Why? Valakar whispered, sinking to his knees before the human officer. It was only one woman. One single diplomat. How could you bring your entire civilization to the brink of ruin over one life? Admiral Vance leaned down, his voice cutting through the stillness of the ruined palace. Because to you, lives are currency to be spent on empire, Vance said softly. To us, every human life is a promise. Commander Vance walked into your chamber unarmed because she believed that 900 years of peace were worth dying for. You killed her because you thought no one would answer. Vance gestured slightly with his hand. Two shock troopers stepped forward, lifting the disgraced Archon by his arms and locking heavy magnetic binders around his wrists. You wanted to end the peace pact. Archon, Vance said as he turned toward the balcony overlooking the subdued Imperial city. Consider it formally concluded. One standard month later, the Grand Conclave of Apex Citadel was filled once again. But the seating arrangement of the galaxy had changed forever. Every ambassador, High King, and Chancellor from all known star systems sat in dead silence as the delegates of Earth walked to the central dais. There were no arrogant chuckles from the alien galleries. There were no dismissive whispers from the Imperial scribes. Whenever a human officer passed, the assembly bowed their heads in genuine, terrified respect. In the center of the hall, where Elena Vance had fallen, stood a newly unveiled monument of polished dark titanium. It depicted the unarmed human commander standing resolute, looking up toward the stars with her hand over her heart. Admiral Marcus Vance stood beside the memorial, addressing the entire gathered Galactic Council. 900 years ago, his voice resonated across billions of live planetary feeds. Humanity agreed to set aside our weapons of war. We chose to build, to explore, and to offer our hand in brotherhood. Many of you thought that made us weak. Many of you thought that our gentleness was cowardice. He looked across the amphitheater, meeting the eyes of every planetary leader present. Let the ruins of Vael Prime serve as an eternal reminder to this galaxy, Vance declared, his voice carrying the full, unyielding weight of humanity's resolve. We will trade with you. We will heal your sick. We will share the stars in peace. But if you raise a hand against our people, if you mistake our kindness for submission, we will burn your empires to ash and remind you why humanity survived the dark. Admiral Vance rendered a crisp, sharp military salute toward his sister's monument. He turned, his coat billowing slightly, and walked out into the light of the stars, leaving behind a galaxy that would never dare underestimate humanity again.